Hello and welcome to the unit on learning and memory. So this is part one, and we're going to speak about the nature of learning and memory. This lecture comes from numerous research articles and studies and books. So it is not easy to find it all focused in one source. So let's begin. These are the items that we are going to explain and in this particular unit, in this particular part, the first part. In order to frame and understand what learning is, we have to look at the human being as a whole. What is the purpose of learning first? Because everything that we are, everything that, about who we are, what we do, is based on how our biology is and how necessary the stuff that we do in the world is. So the human being, basically like any animal, basically, has the ability and the skill to engage in behaviors and in experiences and so on. However, imagine human beings with no ability to remember things. And I mean, even if you can't imagine it, you can see cases of memory loss or cases of people. For example, there's a famous case of someone who got his left temporal cortex removed surgically more than 50 or 60 years ago. And he's, I think, from the Illinois area. And this person cannot remember things. He cannot form new memories. And you can teach and teach and teach him for, for example, as long as you want. But he could remember maybe something in, for maybe a couple of minutes, a couple of seconds or so, and then everything is gone. If you are sitting with him, interacting, and just go to the kitchen or go to the next room, come back, you are a completely new person to him. So he's going to have to ask you new questions, and so the purpose of memory is to enable us to capture experiences that we are engaged in and take these experiences, store them, so that when we engage in similar experiences or in the same experience again in the future, behavior or whatever it is, we can refer back to the record and learn from our previous experiences. So we can direct what we are doing at the moment by reference to what we already know, and to be able to connect our present with the future. So without the ability to hold information in mind and to be able to access it on demand, then basically the human being will not be able to remember much and will not be able to function normally in the society at all, would not be able to build a civilization, and will not be able to build a culture, because nothing would be kept. There would be no record. Every one of us who would come and try to do something, they would have to go through the sequence over and over and over every single time that you have to engage in the activity. Imagine, for example, you would like to make a cup of coffee and that you do not have the ability, you don't have paper, you don't have memory here to store the steps of how to make coffee. And imagine you just go through it step by step and learn and make coffee, and then immediately forget completely. The record is blank. Next day or next time you want to make coffee, you have to go over through the exact same steps over and over and over. So we would live in circles, not progressing, not moving probably beyond the forest, or, progressing as the human being that we know today, human beings that progress from day to day, from generation to generation, from century to century, and as build up on the achievement, collective experiences of all humanity, and keep progressing and building, moving on, and never moving backwards. That is all possible because of the ability to remember. And that, in a nutshell, the ability to remember enable us to invent and to create and to relate to each other and to do everything that we as human beings can do in this world. So think about the human being basically as three things. Number one, imagine, for example, the shell, the outside shell. That is your body, the flesh, bones, muscles, skin, tissue, flesh, and the physical structure. Without a brain, that whole body is not going to survive. It will turn back into the dust it was created out of. Then you put inside of that human being a brain, and now you can have a regulation of heart rhythm, breathing, digestion, this and this and that. And that brain runs the entire body, and it is going to have memory of what goes on, and your behavior, what you see, all the experiences that you engage in. That brain enables you to store those those experiences in the form of memories that you are going to use day by day, hour by hour, in order to kind of develop and grow cognitively, and to be able to progress. So now we have two components. Now we have the shell, the body, and in order to be able to make the body move or think or do anything at all that a living being can do, you have to have a brain there. And in order to make the brain able to control the body and control the functions of the body, you have to make extensions. You have to send the information from the brain to the rest of the body, all parts of the body, your arms, your legs, every single part. You have to send the wire so that you can communicate with this particular part, make it do what you want it to do. So by doing so, you establish the brain and the rest of the nervous system. All these nerves that you see on the left coming out of the brain, they are just coming out from the central engine and going to the different parts of the body to control it. So now, what is it? The brain by itself, it has the ability, but what is there that gives it that ability? You can think it's just like that computer you buy. If the computer doesn't have the software, the operation system to make it actually, function, it is not going to be of any use at all. So the third element is the software that you have in your brain. That software will determine how the brain functions. And when that function, for example, is efficient, that is going to make the body in control. It will make you able to behave as for example, what we say typical or neurotypical individual. So that software piece is the knowledge that we collect through our sensory mechanisms as we live and as we develop. So the knowledge that we have, the information that we have, is what enables that body to move and to do the things that it does to make us a complete human being who is able to behave and to respond and to interact with others in an appropriate manner and to continue to learn. So where does emotion fit into that equation about learning, body, and brain? So that part of what I kind of made an analogy. It's not the best analogy, but that analogy of the software, we call this the mind. So when you say the mind, it is all the knowledge you have in your brain. So there's a difference now between mind and brain. The brain is the actual physical flesh that you can touch. The idea of emotions is that emotions evolved as a mechanism to protect the human being. It is, you can think about it as something that, like a bubble that surrounds you, and it senses, it tests your outside environment, and it says, oh, you are vulnerable to this, or this is dangerous to you, and so on. And in order to make you avoid danger, it is going to elevate your biological functions, like your heart rate, your blood pressure, this and that. So emotions are constantly surveying what is going on around you. When you look at something, it could make you relax, it could make you nervous, it could make you whatever, you are going to generate a response to that. All the experiences you have with anyone, with anything, that is going to generate some kind of emotional reaction. That reaction could stay inside, or it could be, if you choose, it could be exhibited to others to see. So when emotions, because as we interact with the environment, including people and everything around us, emotions is going to constantly evaluate what is going on. And when we see something that engages, that responds to our emotions, that engages us emotionally, we are going to immediately start to pay attention. As we pay attention, then we deploy the learning mechanisms, for example, working memory and the processing mechanisms that can take that information and process it. Why? Because our emotional system and the rest of the nervous system determined that this kind of information is necessary for our survival, necessary for our well-being. And based on that information will have a high importance, because when we store information, there's a system that kind of tags information based on the importance of that information. And information that has an emotional content, negative, positive, especially positive, is going to have will be tagged with especially tagged with high importance so that you can access it readily. So emotions regulate how we learn, how, for example, we store information, and also emotions give us the foundation for our motivation. So emotions and physical activity, I explained the emotion. Now, how does physical activity provide a link? Where does it fit between us and between learning? The idea is the human being has mechanisms biologically to survive, like any animal, has the instinct to survive and to do, things to make us survive. Um, Physical activity is linked to our ability to feed, to eat. We go around and look for food and mostly hunt for food. And so imagine an ancient food gatherer kind of community where the person goes looking for, a rabbit or a deer or something, and they go hunting. That is not an easy process. In order to do that, you have to develop a goal. Now, first, you have a need. Physically, you want to survive, you want to eat, and that's going to give you the motivation. It is going to make you have a goal. Look for food. When you go look for food, what if you pursue a prey and you run and run and run and run from your area of comfort, and it takes you to an area where there's no water. There's nothing to survive on, for example, and you exhaust all the energy you have. And then you are there having run, like, say, 30 or 40 or 50 miles away, and your energy is depleted, you cannot go back. So that's life or death. As a result, human beings developed the ability to, through physical activity, the ability to think about the best ways, the shortcuts that enable you to achieve your goal in a smaller period of time and with a smaller distance to your goal. So you have to think and plan and find means and tools and things, hide and plan a certain time and know what time the prey is going to come, and the likelihood that as you chase it is going to go in this direction or that direction, make traps, and on and on and on. So that need for survival and the physical activity that we do, chasing and looking and discovering, by itself, it becomes rewarding to us. So when we achieve that and achieve our goal of hunting and catching or getting food and finding things that sustain our lives, then we become adjusted, we become happy, and we become assured that we are going to live another day. So today, not all of us go hunt and do all of this. We just go hunt, go to the supermarket with a big list and just dump stuff in our carriage and so on. But we still have the same instincts. When we go and engage in physical activity, that is going to boost our mood, and it's going to boost our cognitive energies, and it's going to renew our brain power. So in here, emotions and physical activity provide the link between the mind, the brain, and the body. I would say among the mind, the brain, and the body. So learning is, of course, mediated by a number of neurotransmitters that we will be discussing, and we are going to go back and forth looking at the limbic system here, which is in the basically in the core of the cerebral cortex, deeper in the temporal cortex here, which has memory, emotions, and it has also several neurotransmitters. It also has movement, and it also has motivation. All of this is in one system, as you could see, as I explained, the relationship, emotions, physical activity, or mood regulation, and emotions, all of them are there, and they regulate learning. They make it possible. The prefrontal cortex is the regulator of your brain, and it is the thing that enables us to have conscious movement, conscious control over our body, voluntary. Anything that you do voluntarily is going to come out of the frontal part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. what is learning exactly? When you discuss learning from a neurological perspective, you see it in a very different way. Learning. Learning is the process of information acquisition. You acquire something new. And elaboration. You develop it, continue to make it grow and grow. That will modify a subsequent behavior. So learning results in modification of behavior. And in order to change behavior, you have to go back to the roots. You have to go back to memory, to learning. It is a change in behavior that results from acquiring knowledge about the world. Memory is the process that you use in order to capture the experiences you go through and to keep them so that you can refer them to them later, so that you can use that knowledge and to guide your present behavior and to plan for the future, so you can do something that you knew worked well in the past and to avoid things that you knew had bad consequences. That's the whole idea. So memory is the process by which the knowledge is encoded, new knowledge, and is stored and is later made accessible on demand when you need it. On the cellular level now, learning is defined as the process in which neurons that fire together, neurons that fire together to produce a particular experience are altered, are changed, modified, so that they can fire together and they can fire again. In other words, learning is the process in which neurons that specialize in the same skill connect together to form a network that can process incoming information and can enable you to exhibit that knowledge through behavior, any behavior, verbal, physical behavior that you do. And learning a skill is going to make that circuit have the likelihood that it will fire again. Because the more a neuron fires, the more likely it will fire again. And the faster it will fire the next time. The more it fires, the faster, the more efficient it will fire every subsequent time. So more learning begets more learning. So the subsequent combined firing of the neurons reconstructs the original experience that is produced. For example, that is going to result in a recollection of that experience. The act of recollecting that experience makes the neurons that were involved at the beginning even more likely to fire again in the future. So to simplify, learning is the process in which neurons that fire together recognize each other and connect to form a network that basically makes that particular skill possible. Now, these neurons have acquired the skill initially. When you want to retrieve, to actually exhibit the skill, to remember the skill, all you do is to make the same circuit fire again. I'll give you an example. Let's say you went to a party and you really had a great time. As you are enjoying yourself and relishing the time that you are spending, with people that you like and having things that you really enjoy. Now, these neurons are firing, they are recording, they are connecting together and capturing that experience in multiple areas so that it becomes accessible to you in different ways. Now, the next day, or a week later, someone, a friend of yours from the party, sends you a picture. As soon as you look at the picture, now you see that, and that is going to trigger the firing of the same circuit, and it will make you recall the happy moments that you lived in that place or at that time. So now you are reliving, recalling the details of the event, even though the event is gone and will never be back, will never go back again. You can relive it in your mind by making the same neurons that captured it fire again. And you can do this on demand and sometimes accidentally. For example, you went there, you smelled a certain perfume, and you associated it with that party. And then you are walking somewhere, even a year or 2 years, 5 years later, you smell that perfume or somewhere else. It's going to make you remember. It's going to make the same neurons and the circuit fire. And when they do that, they are going to give you access to those events and that experience. So you are going to relive that experience, and you will have the same enjoyment, and you will have the kind of the same, kind of happiness, because it causes the release of dopamine and other chemicals, the neurotransmitters that were involved in making you have that experience. So learning is experience dependent. What does that mean? It means that the experience you are engaged in. Let's say you have an interview, and in that interview you have some easy questions, some hard questions, some jokes or something, certain experience that you have during the interview. So you are going to learn some new things about the people who interviewed you, about yourself, and about the whole context and the position you're applying for, and so on. If that experience, if you don't go through that experience, you will not be able to learn what it is like to go to an interview. Someone might tell you, you might observe, whatever, so you can get your information from different sources. But to be efficient in that interview, you have to live it. You go there and live the experience, and by doing so, now you own it. You are going to capture it. You are going to make the memories of it stay in your mind, and that's going to make you do better the next time you go for a different interview. If the interview was 5 minutes, obviously the experience is not going to be as deep as it would be for a half hour. If the interview is a full day, like when we have a faculty member, like hire new faculty at the university, the interview is one whole day. You come and visit the whole campus and go around and visit with every, like different offices and different officials and so on. So that you kind of have a taste. By the time you leave, at the end of the day, you have a taste of what it would be like to work at a university as a faculty member. So the experience, saying that learning is experience dependent, it means that some effects, the effect of time, how long you go through that experience, how frequently, how many times, that is going to determine it's going to determine the quality of what you learn, how efficiently you can retain it, and how much knowledge you can gain at that, at a given time. For example, if I, graduate, go for an interview, just one interview, and then keep working and working and working, like say 5 or 10 years, I don't go to an interview, another one. Now, if there's a need, I'm going to go to an interview in 15 years. I am going to have to learn the skills. It's not going to be that, oh, I'm going to do really well there simply because I had an interview 15 years ago. Imagine someone who, say, goes to several interviews, for example, in 1 year, going to 15 or 20 interviews. Imagine someone whose job is to interview people, and every week, for example, month, that person interviews and interviews. What kind of interviewing skills will that person have? What kind of experience? So being exposed to a skill over and over and over more frequently, that is going to make the information fresh in your mind. What does that mean? It means that the neurons in your brain, the circuits, will be firing, and the more they fire, the more efficient that they will work, and the better that they will store the information, and the more comprehensive that information is going to be. If you say you are a speech language pathologist, for example, or a social worker or a psychologist, and you are working with with an individual, teaching him or her a certain kind of skill, if you say, I am going to give you 1 session a week, I'll be with you for 1 hour every week. Okay, so the person's brain is going to work, and the networks will work for that hour well, and will continue the effect, after. However, I could take that hour, distribute it, break it down into 5 pieces. I'm gonna say, I'm gonna work with you, say 12 minutes a day. Is that 12 minutes? Divide the 60 minutes by 5. And every day just work a small number of like, a chunk of time, but every day. I use this when I do speech articulation activity. I like therapy. You could work on a sound for, as long as you want to during one time. It is not as effective as working just a few minutes a day, every day. Quick exercises to make sure these neurons fire and fire and fire, and they continue firing every day. They are going to connect better, because the skill is going to be always refreshed, and the neurons are used to firing, and that is going to build expertise. So experience is important, is critical to learning. You want a child to learn how to read, you must give the child many occasions where the child is going to experience reading. Reading out loud, and so on, and short periods of time every day. And you kind of increase as you go, and as long as the skill continues to be part of the person's life frequently on a daily basis, then that is going to speed up fluency, and it's going to increase the quality and the quantity of what the person is learning. Memory is the ability to recall experiences that have already happened. We do not recall, or we do not store information like we take a camera and take a picture of a scene. We do not do that. Every one of us, if you have 100 people, say, view this lecture that you are viewing, and then in the end ask each one to summarize it, to tell you what they have taken out of it. You are going to find many differences, and people use their background knowledge, and as the information is coming in, they color the incoming information, color it with their background knowledge, with the perceptions they have about the world. So as soon as information comes in, it's already biased by what we already know. And in some cases, if the person has a certain set of, if that person has information, you are introducing new information that really contradicts what they believe in, what they know, there will be some denial initially. The brain is not going to read, what it doesn't agree with. It's just going to, so the word not, it might be knocked out. Like, for example, instead of do not enter, it can go take not out, do enter. So you are looking for example, you are hungry and looking for a certain thing, and as you look, if you look extensively, everything is going to look like the thing you are looking for. So the brain is going to project things from what it knows, what you know, and it's going to color all this incoming experience with the previous knowledge that you already have. So the more accurate the knowledge you get, the more that you are going to ensure that the incoming information will not be distorted and will not be mixed up. So again, in order to recall information, you basically go through the process of activating the same neurons, the same networks that originally captured and stored that information. All you do is to somehow make them trigger and fire again. As they fire again, they make the information available to you for that duration while they are firing. And this is simply memory. Memory includes the mechanisms that enable us to retain representations of past events that we store and we can recall on demand later. In case I forgot to mention this, your knowledge is a comprehensive collection of all the memories that you capture, that you store over the duration of your lifetime. So all these little bits and pieces of memory that you collect and gather and store, all of them collectively, you call that knowledge, your knowledge. Now let's look at memory in terms of what kinds of memory are there based on the time, for example, and based on the kinds of information that we are speaking about. So sometimes you might, for example, find situations where memory is equated with learning, like you say implicit learning or implicit memory, for example, procedural learning, procedural memory. So you can equate them on a certain level at some point. But let's break things down and make them easy now. If you think about the time, how long do you have this? How, for example, for how long are you going to hold on to that memory? How you are going to access it, and so on. So from the temporal standpoint, the memory falls into explicit or declarative memory. This is the conscious kind of memory that you recall intentionally on demand. Like you are going to tell me a story. You have a reason you are telling me this story. Now that is declarative memory. You show the knowledge that you have in an exam or in a courtroom or when you speak with your physician. All of this you are deliberately taking facts and taking the information and presenting it to others. So explicit or declarative memory includes facts, it includes data, it includes events that you experience and that you consciously recall. This kind of information, declarative memory, includes two kinds of memory. Number one, facts about the world. All this, for example, any curriculum you speak about, that is semantic memory. Any kind of details, facts about the world. This is what we learn, like say university. So that means it is the place that has all the knowledge about the universe that is available. So that is basically everything of that is a part of semantic memory. Episodic memory has to do with personal events that we can relive within the content in which it within, I'm sorry, context. Please change this word, context. So our personal, for example, events like who am I, where am I, the kind of, for example, if you attend, like, say, the relationships you have with people, you attend an event, a certain event, for example, and you experience that kind of relationship with people in the event and so on. So the things that have to do with your autobiography, basically, that is episodic memory. And the semantic memory is about everything else in the world. Implicit memory. Now, from the name, implicit means it is not conscious memory. As a matter of fact, most of the memory kinds that we have are implicit, are memories that are unconscious, that we are not aware of. And most of the learning during childhood is based on these implicit memories. Kids, from birth and through early, like, say, the early stages of childhood, all of these memories are mostly implicit. They are unconscious, and they form the personality of the individual. So this includes emotions. How do you feel? Cognitive abilities that you have, your skills, your attention abilities, for example, your previous experiences, for example, that you recall unconsciously, without, as you are walking and you kind of think about something, you imagine something, all of that is implicit. The information just pops up without any particular recall, purpose. Sensory memory is a kind of memory that every sense is connected to, and every sense has short-term memory and long-term memory. For example, you smell something, and then for the first time you store it now in memory, sensory memory connected with smell, and then you go somewhere else, you smell again the same thing, food or whatever. Now you compare what you are smelling to your memory of that smell, and you see, oh, they match. Oh, and then what you do is you recognize. So recognition is matching something that's incoming with something that you already have here, and you see if this matches that. And if that's the case, you have recalled the information. Taste has memory connected with it. When you taste something, you eat it, and then it is stored in your gustatory memory. And then when you eat the same thing again, you are going to experience the same feeling, the same sensation. Now, do you ever wonder, things never taste the same. This candy or this product, it used to be this and it used to be like that. Now the question is it the product that has changed, or is it you? Are your sensory mechanisms, your sensory, memory mechanisms may have changed, which of course they are subject to change like everything else. I remember someone who was complaining and saying, these days you can't even smell. Nothing smells the same. And this, and he cited all different kinds of things that have been produced in the very same way. But he didn't recognize that the one who is changing is himself. So another person once asked me, and he said, actually from overseas, would you look for me and ask if they have eyeglasses that do not change over time. For example, I mean, why do you have to have a prescription every? So I said, no glasses like this exist. I mean, the glasses do not change. Obviously, you have a pair of glasses, they do not change the acuity. It is your eyes that change, year by year. That is so imagine that, for example, you eat the same candy bar, you have been eating it for maybe 30 years or 20 years, and then you wonder, it doesn't taste exactly the same like it was like 15 or 20 or 30 years ago. It is because of what happens to our sensory memories as we grow and as time, progresses, especially as we age. So now, these, in terms of duration, there is working memory, and there's also long-term memory. So the concept of working memory, you can refer to Alan Baddeley. I just Google Alan Baddeley. He is the first one with someone with the last name Hitch. So Hitch and Baddeley originally started speaking about working memory in England back in the 50s. There came a period of time when, actually it may be a little bit later than the 50s, they came to maybe in the 70s. So anyways, the idea is they used to have phone numbers that are 5 digits. And then they started, to increase, and the population increased, and they said, okay, we're going to add 1 digit. And then it said, well, this is going to happen again, and in a few years, you're going to reach 7 digits. How do people remember that? So they started searching and trying to find ways, and they, coined the terms working memory. And so working memory has 3 major components. One is short-term recall. The ability to recall information, hold it online, recall it or sustain it in your memory for from a half a second to a couple of minutes or several minutes sometimes. But typically, verbal short-term memory is about, on average, 2 seconds, and non-verbal, on average, is is 1 second on average to recall something like for 1 second on average. So there's short-term recall, and then there's an attention component, and there's also a phonemic buffer where you can, as you recall, for example, you spell a word. So say caterpillar. So you go and say C-A-T-E. You recall 4 letters, and then as you say them, another 4 letters come in, set of 4 letters come in, and then you say them, and another set comes in, and you say them. So the phonemic buffer is some buffer, like a screen, where you store information temporarily so that you can provide it to write it or to say it. And the central executive, which is some kind of component that enables you to direct your attention, to direct your memory, to control the situation, to manipulate information. So these are, for example, how do these 3 things work together? I'll give you one working memory task. I'm going to ask you to repeat. I'm going to ask you a question or say something. And then what you do is you answer the question and tell me the last word that I say. So, for example, repeat the sentence, that I say, and then tell me yes or no, or tell me the last word. So I say cats have 4 legs. So what you do is you say yes, for example, and legs. So say the last word. Cats have 4 legs. Yes, legs. Or you could say, tell me the first word and answer the question. Do caterpillars have feet? So you go and say, for example, do caterpillars have feet? And then you say the answer, the last word, and you tell me the true or false, for example. It's just these things that I'm kind of making them up, but typically you do 2 things at once, and that is working memory, and it enables you to focus on more than one thing at a time, at once, and also to hold on to information, manipulate it, and making it ready to process, and to also retrieve information you already have in your brain. It is essential for regulation of self and the regulation of self in relation to others as well. It is important for regulating learning and for regulating memory. How does that do? So, for example, as you are speaking, you are recollecting things in the working memory first and then giving that. Recollecting, because your working memory is the link between your long-term memory and what is going on now. So it collects new information to, or incoming information to your background knowledge. And when you retrieve information, you get it first in the working memory and the short-term memory, and then you provide it verbally or in writing or gesturally, whatever it is. Let's say there's a child who is 2 years old and walking around in the kitchen, and she's going to touch a hot stove. First time she never had the experience, but as she goes, she touches the hot stove and she gets traumatized. She screams and she just gets hurt and she just continues, to cry and so on. She stores this experience. Now, a couple of weeks, maybe a month later, she goes around and kind of around, and then she, obviously, she sees the stove and she's going to extend her hand and she's going to touch the same thing, the kettle, or the same thing that she touched before. If her working memory doesn't immediately activate and trigger to give her the recollection of the previous experience, she is going to repeat the same mistake she did before. So she's going to touch the kettle or the hot stove. Now her working memory will be activated quickly in time, and before she touches, she is going to go back and withdraw without touching the stove. So you could see now how working memory, how it facilitates, it regulates what you do now as you speak, as you behave, as you engage in whatever you do. It pulls all the files you have that relate to the experience that you are engaged in, and it enables you to kind of look as it is like, imagine like someone who has multiple screens open and is going to give you guidance, or is going to talk, and that person has multiple screens and they can refer to these screens and they give you information that is accurate, that is full, and so on. So this is what working memory does. It is really critical. So the role of emotions in coding, the learning process, as I explained later, has many steps. For just one piece of information is going to travel along several stations, several phases, until it becomes implanted, it becomes part of your knowledge. It's like, for example, you want to make a loaf of bread, that the grain that you have in the field, that bunch of grain is the trip it takes, the processing of that grain from that field, every step until you finally have a product in your hand that you call a loaf of bread. All of that is in between is the processing component. So every that grain is going to go through phases. Now it is grain, now it is flour, now it is dough, now it is a loaf of bread, and so on. So a piece of information is going to go through stages, just like, I mean, the analogy of a loaf of bread, and the grain becoming a loaf of bread. So it's going to go through different stages until it becomes a product that you can actually rely on and recall consciously and use, to benefit from in your planning, in your life. So the encoding, I'll define it for the time being. Encoding is, in learning, it means taking in and processing new information. That is what encoding is. So experiencing, the role of emotions in encoding, experiencing an emotion while working, for example, during a working memory task, reduces performance. Like, say, for example, I'm asking you to answer my question and to repeat the last word. Cats have 4 legs. Yes or no? And then say legs. So cats have 4 legs. You say yes, legs. Do snakes have arms? You say, for example, no, arms. So as you are doing this, if you have a certain emotion, for example, while you are engaged in a working memory task, that is going to disrupt your experience. Somehow this is what the research shows. Things that contribute to learning. There are numerous things that are in the environment, numerous things that are in the information itself. And please keep in mind, when I say information, it means any kind of knowledge, anything at all. Like looking at someone, seeing a face, that is information. Shaking hands, that is information. Reading a book, seeing a bird on a tree, anything at all that you can imagine, that is information. So what do you take in? How much you take in? The learning that you get, memory, all of this is going to depend on things in your brain, how your brain is formed, how your brain is connected, how your body is functioning to sustain the brain, how the environment around you is organized, how the information is shared. So a lot of things have to do with the teacher, for example, when we speak about schools, with the environment, the school itself, the home, the society, with the kind of knowledge, with the kind of information, the topics that are being involved, the individual himself or herself. So one major determiner of learning and memory is understanding. Imagine, or you can, without imagining, just open a page to say medieval English, or there's no medieval, just say 9th century English, 9th century English, or even 10th century English. And just read, have a paragraph and go through it and read it. See how much you can understand out of that. Get, say, a German page in a German book and just read it and see how much you understand. So when you do not understand much, you are not going to be able to get in much in here. So if you do not understand something fully, you will not be able to get it in and to integrate it with your previous knowledge. So understanding or making sense of the information and removing ambiguities that may exist in that information, that is going to be a main contributor to your learning and to your ability to remember the experiences. Understanding enhances the encoding process by facilitating the organization of information and the transferring this information more efficiently into long-term memory. Understanding indirectly helps how we retrieve information. So, in other words, say you give me a novel, and I would like to read, so I'd like to learn and to store that information. First thing is, I have to disambiguate the vocabulary. I have to make sure that all the words that are on that page are clear, that I know all the meanings of these words. Now, if I go to the next page without making sure that I understand every single word in that, I am going to have a tough time, because a lot of the words will come back again, and the deeper I go into the text, the more skills I am going to need. And because I don't begin with solid understanding, I am creating gaps and gaps and gaps, and just reading, my understanding will not be full. The ability to recall knowledge from that text is not going to be there, and the ability to take in information and process them, break it down, and so on, it will not be as efficient. So that is an important thing that we need to focus on. Make sure that students understand what the skill is about, what the lesson is about. Make sure that there are no vocabulary words, no ambiguities in the text that they are learning, because when it is presented like that, it's going to enable them to retain information better and to retrieve it on demand. Prior knowledge is very important. Ironically, the more knowledge you have, the more knowledge you get. And there's something called the expert effect. The expert effect obviously is developed by experience, continuous experience doing the same thing or something along that. Say, for example, you have a student goes to, or like say, a 2-year-old. You take the 2-year-old to the library, get a book on animals, on minerals, let's say, and eventually you come to like chemicals and different things and reactions, and kind of read like basic chemistry things with the child and do experiments and so on. The child now, once he or she experiences that, they have knowledge. The next time they want to go to the library, that knowledge that they have is intimate to them. They love it, and they want to have another book that is similar to what they now know. Oh, another book of chemistry. So you go and get another book, and you keep that feeding into that interest. And then now you have the child is basically building expertise, because the more you have about that topic, the more you actually love it, the more you enjoy it. So now think about this in that context. Think about this in the context of the Montessori schools, having the children seek their own interest. So naturally, if you leave a child, have a child in a room with like a whole bunch of books on dinosaurs, and you just start with that, then all the child wants to know is dinosaurs, 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 because the more they know about something, the more that they want to know about it, and they read and read, and it becomes less difficult. It becomes more friendly. It becomes more enjoyable. But if you leave it up to yourself to regulate the interests of that child, to diversify the knowledge of that child, then you can help the child build expertise in that regard. Giving them, read history, read science, read different things in all aspects of life. That is you are going to have a child who develops love for various subjects and is going to develop a wider perspective on life. So, that prior knowledge, the more the child learns about this particular subject, say chemistry, the more he or she wants to go and read more. And the more they read, the more efficient they become. Because now they have a background that enables them to understand incoming information. And by doing so, two things: they will get information faster and they will get more information. To the extent that when this child goes to, say, high school, and he or she is reading a chapter in a chemistry book or a study, and someone else who is not, experienced with chemistry is going to read the same study. Now, the one who has the expert effect, who knows a lot about the topic, is going to just glance at it, is going to form an idea about the content, can summarize it in 5 minutes. The other one is going to continue to labor and try to make sense, and it takes so long for that person to read that same study, and they will not be able to get a comprehensive view of it, and they will not be able to take in as much information or to recall as much information, of that, because it is very new to them. So the one who is an expert has more knowledge, doesn't have to spend so much energy, because that energy is now, all the knowledge in the brain enables him or her to process and to understand what is coming in, and to do it with interest and with motivation. Why? Because you are familiar with that information, and familiar is enjoyable. Familiar is something that you are comfortable with, because it doesn't put as much of a strain on your brain. So, prior knowledge increases emotional engagement, because you love things that you are familiar with. Even people that you spend more time with, you want to be with even more. And it increases your attention. It facilitates encoding and storage and retrieval of new information. Prior knowledge provides the context that enables you to integrate what is coming in with what you already know. It facilitates the processing, breaking down that information. Why? Because when you have a piece of information coming in, you need to have the attention, the working memory. You need to have the spatial processing skills and the encoding skills that enable you to analyze, break down pieces, information into pieces, and to synthesize, come up with new ideas out of reassembling that information, and then start to transfer and be ready to store. Now, if this information comes in prepared and already, and you already have a lot of background knowledge, you'll be able to free your cognitive resources to dedicate them to the amount of information that is coming in. So you have more cognitive resources, you can take in more information, and you can process more at a faster pace, as opposed to someone who is learning the skill and not able to sustain things in memory, and the attention is decreased and depleted because they have to focus so much on the new information. Then they wouldn't have the ability to do a lot, to take in a lot of information, or to take it in fast enough. So as they gain more experience and they do it more and more, they gain automaticity, and that automaticity frees a lot of these cognitive resources to enable the person to focus on that incoming information, and then they build up the expertise, and the things that they called hard, they become experts at, and they build expertise, and then they no longer have that big, concept of hard because it is now familiar to them. Familiarity. Familiarity means exposure to things. The more you do it, the more familiar it becomes, the more efficient your brain becomes, because the neurons, as they fire more they fire, the more efficient the firing is, and the less the easier the process of firing becomes. So new perceptual, motor, or cognitive abilities are learned through repetition. It doesn't have to be the same. Like a repetition could be presenting the information in, say, a video, and then speaking to the person, having a conversation about that. And as long as you refresh the information in different ways, that is some kind of repetition. With practice, and also performance becomes more spontaneous and it becomes faster. And these improvements generalize to learning new information. So the skills that you can use to do more, that to gain to use them in more than one kind of topic or more than one kind of skill. So once you develop something, like say, turn taking is a skill. It is a core skill. It actually begins just immediately after birth, when the baby starts to exchange feeding, for example. The baby cries, the mother comes, or gives comfort, and then the baby stops, the baby cries again, and so back and forth. That is turn taking. Eventually, turn taking is going to take a different form. The mother is feeding the baby with a spoon, or the father, as they spoon the food, the baby is opening her mouth ready, and then the food goes in, and then the parent takes a turn waiting for the baby to chew. And then when the baby is ready, the parent is going to scoop the food, the baby opens her mouth. All of this is turn taking. All of this is going to translate into an adult who is waiting patiently in line to get on a bus, or waiting online to get some paperwork done, or waiting to take a turn during conversation. So the core skill is the same skill that enables you to basically take turns in whatever situation that you are speaking about. So one way that we use, say, for example, in treatment, speech language pathology, we call it cyclic method, with certain people who kind of need more practice, more specialized learning, and you want to work with them, increase exposure. So say, for example, I want to teach them irregular nouns and irregular verbs, and the person has difficulty retaining and doesn't have a background, on this. So I would do, a session with them, teach them, how these things work, and then go through session after session for, say, a week, and then change to a different skill, something related, for a week, and then another skill related for 1 week, and then in the third week I go back to the first skill that I covered, and then go back to the second week, go back to the third week. So in cycles, to kind of keep going and teach and make sure you establish 100% accuracy, but go back and revisit once in a while to ensure that the person gains more familiarity, that the person becomes more spontaneous, and the information becomes second nature. How the information is organized, that also is going to have an impact on how we learn it. If you present me information that is well organized, then that is going to enable me to exert less cognitive effort because the information is already sorted out. Imagine I come, give you a blue folder, a white folder, a yellow folder, a green folder, and a purple folder, and say, would you please take this and store this, these files. You simply just take them, go to the cabinet and put them there. Like all you do, just put them there, the folders. Now imagine I take all the papers out of these folders, and I don't even give you folder, blue folder, whatever. I just take a bunch of all mixed up sheets and say, here, sort this out and store them. How long is it gonna take you? So when you do the organization yourself, you will have no cognitive power to actually process information. You will spend all the time organizing it, sorting it out, making sense of it, sometimes not being able to make sense of it. So the more efficient, the more organized the information that you provide your students, the less the cognitive overload will be on them. The more free resource, cognitive resources that they will have to dedicate to the learning, of the new information you are giving them. So you see yourself how you, as a teacher, as an educator, contribute to actually making the brain work in a certain way, either negatively or positively. What makes learning possible is that that synapse. This is the processing unit, the smallest processing unit that we have. That is what makes the information stay, sustained, going on, fired and fired. As it is fired, we feel it, we know that the information, we recall the information. So activity-dependent plasticity, which is the ability of the synapse to organize and reorganize itself based on what kind of learning that you get, that is the primary mechanism that's involved in learning and memory. If you have a synapse like this, learning, it means that the synapse is constantly working back and forth, sending neurotransmitters, opening channels and gates. And as the signal is more, so for example, coming in faster in a certain way, that is going to make the organization of that synapse very different. It is going to have more channels to receive the information, neurotransmitters and so on, and it's going to increase neurotransmitter output, and the whole thing will be modified, will be changed, and this is what learning is. It makes the whole thing neuroplastic, or it makes it, plasticity means changing. It makes it, changed in a way as to respond to the new learning that is happening from outside. Phases of processing include perceptual encoding, or before that actually perceptual, sensory registering. Like, my sensory channels come in touch, in contact with something. So even if I'm closing my eyes, when I touch something, I am going to feel it. I'm going to know what it is that I'm touching, even if I'm, because I am reading information. That information goes through my arm, to my spinal cord, to my brain. And I have sensory centers here in fingertips that enable us to actually read information, like say Braille, for example. So then the information goes in, and then we start to encode it. And then encoding, breaking it down, making sense of it, processing it, and then transferring it for storage, and then storing it to stay there permanently, and then consolidating it, retrieving it, and then being able to consolidate it. I'm going to explain more of this in the next couple of sections, and I hope that you have enjoyed this lecture, and that you can connect it to what you are doing in your professional careers. And the next section will follow. Thank you.